Hi everyone! This video is about using quotations, reviewing what we learned last session, and extending your knowledge of how to use them. You have to have a lot of quotations for the inquiry report, so this is your opportunity to get this particular convention and skill and bit of knowledge down. So let's take a look first at what we learned from the quiz in session 2. There were a few areas that a number of students had trouble with, so those I'd like to review. Generally speaking, punctuation goes inside the quotation marks. So you have a period and then a quotation mark, or you have a comma and then a quotation mark. It does not go out on the outside unless it's a question, and I'll address that in just a moment. Another point, if you are giving a full sentence and you interrupt that quotation that's a full sentence with the credit, in other words, you have this part that's a quotation, then who said it, then the quotation again. This is the protocol for it. The Broncos may go to the Super Bowl, comma, quotation mark, Megan explained, comma. You're going to offset the part that's crediting the speaker with commas. Then quotation marks and a lowercase letter, because you're in the middle of a sentence about the Broncos. Lowercase letter, and then you finish it, and the entire city will be lit up with orange. Period, quotation marks. So if you're interrupting a full sentence, you don't need to have capital letters in the middle of your sentence. And lastly, the question mark does go on the outside if the question that I'm writing is my question, and part of that question is to quote somebody else. For example, how should Americans defend their country with each and every purchase? Let's say I'm writing something about the trade imbalance with America and other countries, and I'm quoting a speaker who says that we need to defend our country with our purchases. And this is the quotation. We need to defend our country with each and every purchase. The quotation itself is not a question. So the question is mine, and that's why it goes outside the quotation marks. If the question is yours, quotation on the inside or on the outside, and if the quotation is a question from another person, then you'd put the quotation mark on the inside. And that's something we can get additional practice with. So now let's remember just to use quotations judiciously. Inquiry does use a lot of quotations, but you don't want to use quotations just because you're required to use quotations. You want to use quotations carefully, introduce them, integrate them into the rest of your paper, and blend those quotations. So let's take a look at that. Here is a video that comes from an outside source, but it hits all the main points.
One of the most important academic skills you can learn as a writer is blending quotations into your own writing. When you quote another writer's words, it's best to introduce or provide context for that quotation. Quotations that are improperly introduced or stand alone like orphan sentences are quite jarring to the reader. Poor blending leaves the reader wondering what the quotation is doing in your work and what it is supposed to prove or illustrate. Good blending, on the other hand, shows that you are in control of other people's arguments and that you will thoughtfully and logically consider the transition between sentences. Let's start with a quotation that we wish to use in an essay about smoking. The rate of secondhand smoke in public gathering places, like bars and restaurants, is 3 times the rate of private residences. Now, there are 3 general approaches we can employ in order to blend this quotation into our writing. The first approach is to introduce a quotation like the following. In this case, you are announcing a quotation, and a full colon is most appropriate. A colon is often used if you're quoting a full sentence, and it's the best alternative to deploying a quotation as a standalone sentence. As I mentioned earlier, we should avoid plunking down a quotation and letting it stand by itself. Also note that if we used a comma in this example, we would create a comma splice. This we must avoid, as grammar rules apply to any sentence, including those with quotations. A second method for blending is to treat the quotation like dialogue, and introduce the author beforehand. The verb writes or says, if it is spoken aloud, concludes a subordinate introductory clause. This creates a natural pause that requires a comma. Other common verbs for this sort of clause include notes, observes, argues, and maintains. The third technique for blending is incorporating the quotation directly into your own sentence. In this example, the original capital T is replaced by a lowercase t to ensure that the quotation is completely blended in to your own sentence. The brackets alert the reader to a modification that respects the rules of capitalization. In this technique, the words that and as are commonly used before the quotation. Another version of this method is paraphrasing part of the quotation and just using a small portion of the original wording. As we can see, the small portion of quotation is used as if it were part of your own sentence. Like sentence length, it's best to use a variety of blending approaches. But this is the method that I use the most. It's also highly recommended for university essays. So don't be afraid of quotations. Blend properly. They will enhance your writing and provide credibility to any explanation or argument you wish to write. Good luck.
Okay. Now let's take a look at ways to incorporate quotes a little bit better. You want to use support, and you want to make sure that the paper is yours. As with Denver Water, you want to use what you need, and you do, in fact, need a lot of quotations. But the key is you'll have to evaluate which quotations really have some value because of the way they're phrased, and which pieces of information could be paraphrased. Regardless, you're going to need to use different conventions for handling quotes. So let's look at some additional conventions you might need. Again, this is an outside source, and you may want to reference this.
We're going to discuss the differences between quotations and paraphrases, and also address some frequently asked questions concerning quoting. We're all familiar with quotations, where we take exact words from another source and place them within our text surrounded by quotation marks. A paraphrase is different. Here's our original quote. Happiness, more specifically positive mood, is influenced by genetics, leading theorists to propose a genetically determined set point for happiness above which one cannot rise, writes Peterson and Park. Instead of including these exact words, we may want to provide our reader with just the main point of the text. We do that with a paraphrase. Here's a paraphrase of our quotation. Genetics is partially responsible for a person's happiness, establishing a limit for how happy one can be. Even with a paraphrase, we will still create an in-text citation just as we would when quoting. In creating this paraphrase, we conveyed the main point while following the number one rule of paraphrasing. Paraphrase in your own words. We didn't just take the quote and change a couple of the words, we altered everything. The main idea is the same, but the two sentences are very different. There are times where we might want to include a unique word or phrase from the original quotation. For instance, the phrase set point would be useful to include in our paraphrase. So we do that by placing quotation marks around it. Now let's look at some common questions that may come up while quoting sources. How do we format really long quotations? For quotes that are longer than 4 lines, we will create what is called a block quotation. Notice how the quote is set off from the rest of the text. It is started on a new line and indented 1 inch or 2 tabs. The previous sentence that introduces the quote ends with a colon. We have still included the author's last name and the page numbers, but the page numbers are within parentheses after the closing punctuation mark. How can we skip part of a quotation? When typing a quote, we may want to omit part of it if the information isn't essential. We can do this by using an ellipsis or 3 dots in a row. The in-text citation will be the same. Okay, we're reading a journal article that is a great quote from another source. If we use the quote, do we cite the journal article or the original source where the quotation first appeared? Ideally, we would use the citation in the journal article to find the original source and then cite the quotation from there. However, if we can't access the source or don't have time, we can cite the quote as coming from an indirect source, in our case the journal article. We do that by using QTD(in), meaning quoted in, and then the journal article's author and page number within parentheses at the end of the sentence. Again, we would be better off finding the original source if possible. The final video of this series will discuss the works cited page.
And that is a video that gives you lots of tips for using parts of quotes, pieces of quotes, interrupting quotes, long quotes, and so forth. You'll get some additional practice as you get to your paper, and I'll coach you through the process.